Good morning. This is Haley Solomon with the North Carolina Housing Coalition. Thank you for joining us this morning for our housing call. And without further ado, I will turn it over to our Executive Director, Samuel Gunter.
Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well. I'm going to start off with some apologies. Stephanie Watkins Cruz and Anna Pattison are both taking some much earned vacation. So unfortunately, you got me this morning. We're coming off of our fall conference, and to all of you who are on this call, who we got a chance to see in person last week in Raleigh, it was so good to see you and to see so many new faces. For the first time, we topped over 1,500 people showed up from around the Southeast. It was our biggest conference yet, and our folks did a fantastic job. If you are communicating with Haley Solomon in particular, give her a big shout out for all the work she put into making this conference go off without a hitch. So again, thank you so much. A couple of things from the conference that I want to remind folks of before we jump into the updates. Top of the line is we are putting out a network survey. There's linked in our housing call notes. You'll see it on our website. It's been in Housing Matters. As we are facing so many headwinds in the work that we do on a daily basis, from federal government shutdown, lack of a state budget passed, as well as the broader cost challenges that impact the hard cost side of developing. Over the history of the coalition, we have, in addition to being the policy and advocacy voice around affordable housing, we also step up into gaps as we identify them. And as we try and get a sense of how our world is shifting and how we need to shift in order to meet the need, we would love your feedback on what you need to see from us as we grow to meet our moment. So please find our network survey either in the call notes on our website or in Housing Matters, and take a second to give us some feedback. Give us a sense of what's happening with you and how you need us to show up differently in the coming months and years. I appreciate that. So now on to what's happening in housing policy. And we got to start at the federal government because we are shut down. Last week, the federal government entered a shutdown after lawmakers failed to pass a stopgap spending bill. Democrats are holding the line, wanting a clean extension of the Affordable Care Act tax credits to be included in the continuing resolution, as premiums are set to more than double in the coming year. Republicans who need bipartisan support in order to pass a budget are refusing to come to the table to compromise. You can learn more about what essential services will continue at HUD. We got their contingency plan posted, a link to their contingency plan posted in the call notes. You can also find a summary we're linking to from the National Association of Affordable Housing Lenders. And for those of you who are at the conference and we're at our industry update, which is always our last session, Sarah Brundage, who's their executive director, was our industry update speaker. She did a fantastic job. Some things to know. There's obviously a lot more detail than this, but some things to know. HUD will operate in a limited capacity. More than 70% of their staff have been furloughed. And households that receive HUD assistance are going to continue to receive those payments through November. FHA multifamily insured products with scheduled closings can continue on that track, but there will be no new commitments made. Fannie and Freddie do not rely on government funding and will continue normal operations. HUD CDBG disaster recovery funding for Western North Carolina, however, is going to be further delayed. Most of FEMA's work will continue because it is deemed essential, but around 20% of their staff are furloughed, and the National Flood Insurance Program is unable to renew or sell new policies during the shutdown. One of the items that keeps popping up in each of these are furloughed staff, and something not only to watch, but also if you are in regular communication with your elected officials, especially at the federal level, to communicate to them. The talk from the administration is a threat to eliminate entirely furloughed non-essential positions. This is, again, as we've been talking about throughout the year, with the threat of staffing cuts at federal agencies, would ultimately lead to staff capacity issues and major delays for federal programs, federal resources that our state and communities rely on. Another piece in the shutdown is that the Census Bureau website is offline. Last we checked, and if this shutdown continues more than a couple of weeks, this could impact future data reports. We saw this already with the Bureau of Labor Statistics and their inability to report new employment data. And so these are data sets that we use in our county profiles, for instance, that a lot of you take advantage of. So those are some things to kind of keep in mind as we are in the early days of a shutdown and don't have a sense at the moment of how long this is going to last. Some additional resources that you should take advantage of. The National Housing Law Project has put out a piece on HUD tenants' rights during the shutdown. For those of you in the legal services world, or those of you who are managing HUD properties or our tenants' rights groups. Governing Magazine has put out a piece on what the federal shutdown means for states and local governments that you can look, again, linked in our call notes. And then the National Council of Nonprofits put out a What Should Nonprofits Do guide generally. So for the nonprofits out there, the tenant right folks out there, the folks who manage HUD properties, state and local government officials, there are pieces targeted at your specific piece of this ecosystem that you can take advantage of. All of that, again, linked in the call notes. Some other federal headlines are last week, HUD published the guidelines for the 2026 qualified census tracts and difficult to develop areas, or QCTs and DDAs, for those of you in the Opportunity Zone world, and then the LIHTC world. Loan causing tax credit properties in these areas are eligible to receive a higher credit allocation. So that is something to note, to look at. And on the Opportunity Zone front, Treasury and the IRS last week issued guidance on rural opportunity zones. And so rural areas will be defined as areas with 50,000 people or less. And the substantial improvement threshold for required additions to the basis for property located in rural opportunity zones was reduced from 100% to 50%. This is something that we talked a little bit about during the industry update at the conference last week. And Sarah noted that one of the big kind of new pieces that's going to be coming in 2026 is our states are going to be reassigning our opportunity zones for North Carolina. So that's going to be a place to look out for in terms of advocacy and in terms of opportunity for investment in your communities. There's also a piece on recently, North Carolina Congressman Chuck Edwards introduced the Bipartisan Faith and Housing Act alongside Congressman Scott Peters of California. This bill would cut red tape around zoning and allow nonprofit religious organizations across the country to develop affordable housing on religious land. There are a couple of other pieces around the impact of new tariffs, particularly around kitchen cabinets and bathroom vanities, will increasing to 50% on January 1st, 2026. This is going to increase construction costs for affordable housing. So something to take stock of, and again, communicate with your elected officials on. Politico is also reporting that an anonymous source at HUD is expecting half of HUD's homeless programs funding for permanent housing to be cut and moved to transitional housing assistance, and will include work requirements. Again, these are anonymous sources coming out of HUD, but unpublished documents also suggest HUD plans to penalize organizations applying for funding if they previously used racial preferences or recognized transgender individuals. Funding cuts are estimated to put upwards of 170,000 people at risk of experiencing homelessness. This continues there's really no way to sugarcoat this, an all-out assault on the federal infrastructure for responding to the homeless crisis we're experiencing across the country, making resources harder to move, making it harder for folks to access, making it harder for folks to find housing. Several other things I'm going to skip through as we are running short on time. On the state side, you got to start with, we are still without a state budget. I was speaking to some friends at a social gathering last night who were unaware of the fact. It's important to note we still do not have a state budget months into the new fiscal year. This obviously impacts, as we've talked about many times on this call, affordable housing, as we do not have the workforce housing loan program funding allocated. But it is also a concern, as is the federal shutdown, around increasing and what are going to be significantly increased health care costs. And for those of you on this call who might be confused why we're talking about healthcare costs on a housing policy call, many of you have heard me say that affordable housing is essentially a basic math problem with two variables. How much does your house make? How much does your housing cost? And you can move either or both of those variables to get to affordability. And vastly increasing healthcare costs for families is going to make housing more unaffordable and more out of reach for more people. It significantly impacts the work that we do and the people that in communities that we serve across the state. Also on the state side, the Regulatory Reform Act of 2025 became law on October 6th. Without the governor's signature. This legislation includes a number of wastewater provisions, most notably, though, prohibits waiting periods for refiling of development applications. There were a couple of land use pieces in here. Also limits parking space size requirements and paving design standards. This will ultimately help increase housing supply and density. And if we can talk more about that in the weeks to come. I know that sometimes land use policy for a lot of us that are focused on unit production, it impacts everything that we do. But most of us, if we haven't gone to planning school, are not often in the weeds on land use policy and how it impacts development costs and so on. A couple of other pieces specifically on disaster recovery headlines. Governor Stein has announced $9 million in grants to 14 different nonprofit volunteer organizations helping to rebuild Western North Carolina. There are a number of reports in here. Western North Carolina needs 34,000 new homes by 2028 to meet demand after Helene. Another piece from the Assembly on in Asheville, a natural disaster and a housing crisis collide. And so on. There's a number of pieces out there, especially with the year anniversary of Hurricane Helene hitting Western North Carolina, about the state of play in recovery, where we're falling short, where we need to be investing more, and so on. I'll also want to announce that, and we announced this at the conference last week, we have entered into a partnership with the American Red Cross and a couple of our housing counseling agencies to provide foreclosure prevention work in Western North Carolina for folks having trouble paying their mortgage. I think one of the pieces coming out of the storm that it takes a minute for some folks to wrap their heads around, but there are the 71,000 plus homes that had a direct storm impact. They were damaged or destroyed that need rebuilding or repairing. But then there is all of the impact to the local economy and the knock-on effect of the cost of housing, losing 71,000 housing units, right? That impacts folks who may or may not have had what we would call a direct storm impact. And so we see the reverberations go out, and we are going to be seeing them for a decade. And we will continue to remind folks that the work is barely even begun, much less it's not over. So there are a number of pieces in the housing call notes about the year anniversary of Hurricane Helene and the state of play. Several of the pieces, the 2026 qualified allocation plan for North Carolina has dropped QAP. The first draft has been released and the comments published. So you can check that out and get public comments in. Some other local headlines. I'm not going to go through them because we are right at time. A couple of other reports and events to take note of. There is a webinar coming up on October 15th, Tips and Tricks for Making the Most of the National Housing Preservation Database from NLIHC and the Public and Affordable Housing Research Corporation. It's again, October 15th at 2 p.m. There's also a piece being done by the Urban Institute on October 30th called Corporate Ownership of Housing, Policy Innovation and Organizing, for any of you who may be interested in that. The American Planning Association's North Carolina chapter fall conference is also happening October 15th through 17th in Charlotte, if you are interested in attending that. There is also the UNC School of Government on the 16th is putting on an affordable housing seminar, tools, strategies, and case studies for local government leadership. This is October 16th in Chapel Hill, and you can find more about that on our website. 2025 conference for North Carolina's nonprofits is coming up November 19th and 20th in RTP. And then there's several other events here, but I think those are all that I am going to highlight. There's some other reports. The role of low-income housing tax credit in preserving affordability from NCHFA. There's a white paper that is well worth reading. Another piece from the Poverty and Race Research Action Council and Mobility Works on housing mobility programs throughout the country. Some other pieces on eviction cases that were won by tenants and impact from NLIHC. Joint Center for Housing Studies, again, putting out a piece on 2/3 of working age renters struggling to afford basic needs. So more on kind of data around the housing crisis nationally. That's all I've got for you this week. Again, the big highlight was, again, thank you so much for those of you who came out to our conference. It was a fantastic, another incredibly successful event, topping over 1,500 people for the first time. Seeing so many new faces. And I want to put in front of your top of your inbox again, the network survey. We need your feedback as we are trying to shift and adjust to meet our moment. And we want to be able to meet it for you and with you. And again, stay tuned here as we will continue to update you on the federal government shutdown, its impact, and a path to getting to a state budget as well. As always, thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you next time.